Now, let's bring you this story. Women are still paid much less than men. They also have fewer opportunities for career advancement. The gender pay gap happens in men and women doing the same type of work for work of equal value. This problem seems to affect women in the middle and upper wage bands the most. So how can we increase transparency in the gender pay in South Africa? Let's just discuss this now with Professor Anita Boscha from the Stellenbosch Business School. Prof, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. We're sort of zooming in on this matter because it's been topical after Banyana won the African Continental Cup of Nations, coming back and the president saying he's told SAFA to pay them equal pay, equally as the male national men's football team, Bafana. And then we thought, let's look at this thing broadly. The gender pay gap in South Africa, how big is it?
Well, Dan, I suppose how long is a piece of string? So there isn't a definitive answer to that. If you look at the national data, it depends where you lie within the band. On average, it's said to be around about 30%, but it really depends on the data set that you look at and also where in the pay bands.
So when you say where in the pay bands, just take us through that. Would you find that the gender pay gap is more pronounced as you move up the pay bands?
Yes, so the interesting thing is there was the last study, a large study that was done on this using national data, showed that the lower bands practically the gap has closed. In the middle bands, it still remains at around about 30%, and then if we go into the upper percentiles of earners in South Africa, there the gap closed soon after the dawn of democracy, but more recently in the past 10 years it has started increasing again, which indicates, and there's no particular reason for that, because women and men in those bands usually have the same level of expertise and also qualifications. Okay, now we see, for example, most times the remuneration of listed entities is public. One would imagine that at the top level, at the stock exchange level, companies that are listed, they are much more attuned to that, to making sure that gender pay gap is not there. Am I correct or not? Well, it really depends, and I haven't done an actual study to compare at that level the salaries. What we do know is that when things are made public, usually companies try to put their best foot forward, and so usually yes, that level of transparency does help. Certainly, globally, what we've seen is that level of transparency has in certain sectors even pushed up executive pay, because executives started comparing their pay to others and sort of nudging their boards to say, well, look at what's happening over there, perhaps my salary should increase. So that's been an effect also of transparency, but transparency is one of the mechanisms that is best utilized to point to people that are not perhaps meeting with the minimum requirements.
Yeah, that transparency might not be sufficient today, because companies that are not listed, they won't share that kind of information. But with some level of transparency and with the public discourse around this issue of the equal pay for equal work across genders, that has been with us for quite some time. Do you see this in your research, Prof, as a gap that is widening in South Africa, or is there some progress?
Well, I think we've certainly made a lot of progress in terms of gender equality. If we just think about the different generations, my generation definitely enjoys different privileges to the generation that came before me. So from generation to generation, we can see differences. However, with regards to pay, a lot of women are still predominantly employed in clerical positions, nurses, teachers. Those are usually areas that are quite underpaid. And very often then we do suffer from attracting the right types of skills into those areas. In terms of clerks, the category of clerks, there are more women employed there than men, and some studies point that some women earn, or that women earn more than men in that particular area. But wherever we see a male-dominated sector, there we find that women usually underperform platform in terms of pay, and there are many reasons that are attached to that, but that's most likely one of the biggest drivers of the gender pay gap.
Yeah, one would imagine sectorally labor-intensive and heavy industry types and mining and all of those kind of things might be some of those industries. If transparency plays a role in improving and addressing the issue of the pay gap between men and women, are we doing enough of it, or what else, Prof, from your research that you're seeing could assist to close that gap even further?
Well, I think we're certainly, with every type of equality issue, we can do more. And in terms of transparency, any organization that wants to attract the right level of talent and wants to ensure that they can communicate their practices, their culture of equality and inclusion, would benefit from being very transparent about their pay and pay structures. If we look at government, for instance, the government pay structures are well publicized, and one can sort of, if a job is advertised at a particular level, you can see what the pay would need to be, and then therefore that level of transparency is very helpful. A lot of companies tend to want to hide these things, and often they say that it's a private issue, but really when we thinking about equality across the bands, it's no longer really a big private issue. I think the other area where a lot of the gap is captured is also in the discretionary pay. When we look at the guaranteed packages with those, and that's what's usually published, if it's transparent, usually companies stick to that. But it's also with things like bonuses and performance pay, share options and so forth. That's where it gets a little bit more muddy, and usually companies are not transparent about that area. And certainly there we can still do a lot of work.
Yeah, there's still a long way to go. Thank you very much for your time and insights here, Professor Anita Boscha from the Stellenbosch Business School, just focusing on the gender pay gap that's been brought to the fore this week, particularly after Banyana won the African Women's Trophy, the Continental AFCON Trophy.